Hello and welcome to the Last Edit podcast. I am Citizen Sleeve and this is my wonderful friend.
Silver Hawkins.
For those who don't know, this is a weekly film podcast. I think this is like 41 now, excluding our specials. So we've been doing this a while now. Every week, Silver and I alternate between film choices that we then have a rather detailed discussion about. Now, this week I have chosen a really truly obscure comedy film that I don't think a great deal of people will have seen before. It went under the radar when it came out. It's a really unique film, and that film is the Monty Python's Life of Brian. Maybe not so obscure.
You joke about it, but kids today, right? Are they that familiar with it? Are they familiar with Monty Python even? I don't know. Maybe a lot of the pop culture has sort of seeped in, and they don't necessarily know where Look on the Bright Side of Life is from. They're just familiar with a lot of the tropes and the jokes that are sort of carried on.
Those moments kind of plucked out of the original context and reimagined in a different context.
It certainly is a tremendously influential film, but I think it has sort of waned in terms of its fame today compared to where it has been.
Yeah, certainly, and as a film lecturer, I often find it's very interesting what students are actually watching at that age, and definitely it's not as on their radar as it certainly would be for maybe even 10 years ago. But Life of Brian, to me, is the single best comedy ever made. Full stop. Always has been. It makes me chuckle my ass off. Every joke still lands for me almost. There's almost nothing wrong with this film. It's almost a perfect film, apart from some very, very tiny minor things we'll get to for a particular reason. Okay, very, very quick narrative recap, and then we can crack on with the cool stuff. So, Life of Brian is, in essence, a retelling of the Jesus of Nazareth Christ story, kind of concurrently along Jesus kind of being alive, where this kid called Brian is seen as the new Messiah.
Because he's born on the same day as Jesus Christ, pretty much same place, pretty much.
The manger next door.
Initially mistaken for the Messiah, even, and that's going to be a recurrent theme throughout. So, really, the Life of Brian is kind of a Christ story, just on a different person.
Just like the guy next to Christ, who's just a couple of meters over from him, just doing kind of similar things, but a little bit freaked out by it all. Yeah. And we get some amazing moments in this film. My God, the whole cast of this film, as you'd expect from the Pythons, is outstanding. But beyond that, all the peripheral characters, Connie Booth, there's some great performances in there to support that main cast.
Yeah, and great direction by Terry Jones.
Terry Jones is... not only did I direct this, but some of his performances in this film are absolutely staggeringly good. Not only is he Brian's mother, who we see straight away in the manger when the three wise men turn up, and she's all freaked out by what's happening, and then she starts accepting the presents, and then she gets... they realise it's not Christ, and we start taking the presents away, which is absolutely brilliant. But we should mention that the one bone of contention, possibly in the whole film, is the blackface that is on Graham Chapman in that particular
John Cleese, I think it is.
Is it John Cleese? Yeah. Or is it all of them?
No, it's only John Cleese.
And you can obviously see the neckline.
One of the wise men.
It's not great. Of its period, okay, I think 79, so okay, but it's still...
Yeah, I mean, it's just... Yeah.
Yeah, of its time. But beyond that, this is just exceptionally funny almost all the way through. So then we meet Brian properly as an... Oh, no, first of all, Brian... His name is Brian. That opening song, Shirley Bassey, Terry Gilliam's animation.
Yeah.
Oh!
The credit sequence.
Just so good. So good. And he grew. Just, really funny. So, Brian basically goes through these trials and tribulations that fit around this Christ story. And the comedy is so well written and paced and structured. All of the jokes have these wonderful build-ups and setups and then land afterwards. And we can see that throughout the film. One of the first sequences we see is Jesus of Nazareth on the Mount, giving his sermon. And we pan all the way back to the people way, way off in the distance who can barely hear what he's saying. And they're all making comments on it and misconstruing what he's saying because they can't hear it properly. And it's so funny, some of the stuff they mishear. Blessed are the cheesemakers. It's just outstanding.
The
And that
Greeks have
guy who then
inherited the
goes,
earth. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, just slight variations that people miss here. That guy goes, I don't think he means cheese makers literally. I think he means the maker of any dairy products.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, okay. And then Eric Idle is there with Michael Palin, who's with his wife, and he starts calling him Big Nose. And Michael Palin, don't you fucking call me Big Nose. I'll fucking have you.
But you
And
do
his
have a
wife's
big
like,
nose.
calm
Big
down.
nose. Yeah.
It's just so funny. But the idea of this otherness, this slight displacement for the thing everybody knows about, just slightly off in the background, watching on this thing, kind of not quite understanding it, is a really unique way of talking about the absurdity of religion and how it works and how it can enthrall people.
I mean, it's a commentary on the interpretation of scripture.
Yeah,
it's really what it is, because scripture was just basically, until it became like written down with the Bible, it was oral history delivered, and then eventually it became written down. But even as it was written down, it was still interpretation,
open to interpretation, as most scriptures are.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made that Life of Brian is the best comedy film ever made. I don't think there are any jokes that really sort of fall flat in it. They're all enormously well constructed. Most of them are fairly clever. It's not just toilet humor, or it builds. It actually takes the time to build on its jokes. Like, my favorite joke in the film is one of my favorite jokes in any comedy film, which is the slew of revolutionary movements, from the Judean People's Front to the People's Front of Judea, the People's Liberation Front of Judea, and whatever. And the fact that they all have a common cause to sort of bond together, but they all absolutely hate each other's guts over minor differences. And yeah, it's like that's something I recognize enormously from politics, and I think that's the sort of comedy that Python does so well. It's another take, basically, on the peasant joke from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, with the anarcho-syndicalist commune. Yeah. Anyway, it's enormously well constructed. It's really, really funny. It goes places you didn't necessarily expect. It's the most focused Python has arguably been. It's much more focused than Monty Python and the Holy Grail. There's a narrative through line throughout, even though that narrative through line is really just an excuse to sort of set up the jokes. That narrative through line still works and is enormously funny, even when it goes off into outer space at one point, in a really, really surprising twist that you do not see coming. Yeah, it's an enormously clever, enormously inventive, enormously funny film. And like you said, like the cast members throughout are really, really strong, from Chapman to Cleese to Terry Jones to Eric Idle. Like, they're all, and of course Michael Palin. They're all enormously funny. And they all get their own moments to shine in the film. Like, John Cleese gets the stoning, and the Roman grammar Nazi. Like, Michael Palin gets Pontius Pilate, and like the guy with the crosses, like the executioner
crucifixion.
Or whatever.
One row over to the left.
Yeah. Like, Terry Jones gets the mother and the hermit, like Brian's mother and the hermit. And Graham Chapman obviously gets Brian, like the main lead. He's the only one who only gets that one character. I think. I don't think he has any other characters. And of course,
no, he doesn't.
Of course, Terry Gilliam also has a couple of parts in it as well, beyond just being like the animator. With
those two prison guards.
Yeah, stuttering prison guard. And yeah, Eric Idle getting like the leper, the troller, the master troller, who also ends up trolling at the end, to getting himself off the cross inadvertently. Yeah, it's a brilliant movie. Cannot recommend it enough to anyone who hasn't seen it.
It's a masterclass in how to. I mean, as you said, right? I'm a fan of most Python, but Holy Grail, as funny as it is, and by God, it is funny, it's unfinished. It just is. They just got to a point where they
Yeah,
ran
and
out of
it's
money and
just
went,
chaotic.
okay. Yeah. And Meaning of Life is an anthology about death and life. It's, that links together. Brian is the strongest narrative cohesion amongst those films and has some of the best moments. I mean, straight after the mount that we talked about, we get Michael Palin as the ex-leper. Oh, got some coin for an ex-leper?
Yeah,
What
because
do you mean
he
ex-leper?
was healed by Christ. So
Minding
lost
my
his
bloody own
livelihood.
attention one
Yeah,
day, and Jesus came over, cured me, bloody do-gooder.
yeah,
And he's bouncing about on one foot, hopping around. He's so funny and electric in that scene. And the fact he's trying to haggle for a higher amount of his own, the money that's going to be given to him. And
yeah.
then in the end, it goes, 3 denarii for me bloody life story. Oh, man, he's so funny. This is with his mother at this time, so they're moving through the market stalls and they go into a stoning. And the stoning is just fantastic, quite frankly. So first of all, they go. Women can't be at the stoning, so his mum has to wear a beard, and they
Yeah,
go
they
to the place.
all wear fake beards because
So
they're
all
all
different
women
colours as
going
well.
to the stoning. Yeah.
Redhead, blonde, black. It's funny as hell. But just prior to that, they have to go and buy the gravel they want to throw, or the stones, or all these things. And they're buying them. And then I'm sure it's Connie Booth, who was John Cleese's wife when they were making Fawlty Towers. She's the waitress in Fawlty Towers. I think Connie Booth anyway. My God. But she walks past with like a doll stuffed donkey on her shoulder and just goes, "Oh, he's not well again." So, just these moments are so amazing. So then we get to the stoning, and oh man, it has to be one of the funniest scenes. Cleese is amazing in it. The character actor who's playing the guy who's going to get stoned because he said Jehovah when he was eating a bit of halibut is another feature throughout early Monty Python films.
That halibut was fit for Jehovah.
Fit for Jehovah. We'll get to that. So he's
You're
on
making
trial
it worse
for
for yourself. Worse? How can it be worse?
Jehovah. Absolutely hilarious, man. So he's, and we should say as well, there's 2 Roman guards, and they do this throughout the film, who just go, roll their eyes, as they often do. These silly people doing these silly things. So the crowd is all women, and John Cleese's character is reading out what he's done wrong, and every now and again, they'll start screeching like, "Oh no!" Back down to men again. Are there any women here? No. Just And then he gets caught in his own trap, doesn't he? Which is hilarious. So they start talking about Jehovah. He's like, "If you say Jehovah one more time," and he said it out loud, and so the crowd stones him. It's, oh man, just as you said, the way that it's constructed to subvert expectations to some extent, and the way it builds these little insignificant things, build and build and build and build. Oh god. And I think after that we get to the grammar Nazis. You can talk about that because that's another piece of sensation.
Well, I mean, Brian meets as
we should. Yeah,
as is often the want for like left-wing movements or revolutionary movements. One of the reasons it tends to attract men is because it attracts a lot of women. Like there are a lot of women in the socialist parties, and the revolutionary parties and anarchist parties. And yeah, so Brian falls in love with a very attractive young woman who is a member of one of the revolutionary movements for liberating Judea from Roman occupation. And he then tries to join the movement, and in order, his sort of initiation rite then becomes to go out and write Romans Go Home in Latin all over the walls. And as he does so, he gets caught out by a Roman sentry who goes up to him and then corrects his Latin because it's awful, and forces him to write it out in proper Latin, like 1,000 times, I think, or something to that extent.
Yeah.
Around there, and then of course he does that. It takes him all night, and he's finally done. And then you see the finished work, which is a masterpiece. Like with Romans Go Home, all written all over the place, and then another passing patrol who weren't privy to Brian's task then pass by and see Romans Go Home everywhere, and they start chasing Brian.
The dialogue in that scene is something to behold. because these guys are very intelligent people, and the way that he breaks down the Roman grammar
Yeah.
to Brian, conjugate the verb to go. Oh man, it's such a masterclass in how to use
Your proper
language,
conjugation, proper
structure, and
tense.
comedy. Yeah, oh man, it's so funny. I just want to back up as well. When Brian actually meets the People's Front of Judea, he's in a coliseum and he's handing out condiments. Well, condiments back then were badgers' noses, waffles, nip chips. Get them where they're hot. It's so funny. And then when he meets them, and he meets Reg and the guys for the first
in
time.
the gladiator arena, when there's a little scrawny guy who's supposed to get killed by the big bad gladiator, and he just runs around the arena, and the big guy eventually collapses because he can't chase him.
I'm having a cardiac arrest, which again, very Python. So many funny moments, man, and that People's Front as a collective are hilarious. Is it no, Reg is the leader, and Eric Idle's character. It's like, I want to be a woman. Why do you want to be a woman?
Stan.
I want to have babies. Stan. Well, you can't have babies. You can't fight against my right to have babies. Well, you can't. You haven't got womb. It's like just some of the characterizations are immense.
What I love about that joke is that joke has sort of taken on a different meaning today, with a lot of people using it to sort of cite against political correctness and cite against like transgender people and ridicule them. And you could, but what I love is that after that sequence, nobody ridicules Stan anymore, and they call her Loretta. Just from that point on, she's just Loretta, and no one even bats an eye at it. She's just Loretta. Yeah. So I think it's a really solid way of handling that to me. In a way that I think sort of escapes the attention of a lot of people who would sort of try and use that joke as for other purposes.
Yeah, they don't see the acceptance afterwards.
Yeah.
Because once they have that conversation, you said it's entire acceptance. It's never mentioned again in a negative or derogatory way.
No, he's just Loretta. Yeah.
Which in itself is really, really cool. And that group is hilarious, man. The bit where they sit down and they're trying to go through the reasons why they want to. And
I will say, like,
disrupt
the reason why it's funny isn't to mock Stan's characters, because it's the same reason why it's funny to see a muscular man in a dress. It subverts expectations. It's subversion of expectations. That's why it's funny. To me, at any rate.
There's a scene a bit later when they're all in their secret hideout. And there's the old guy at the door. They're having a meeting prior to that, actually. That's a bit later on. But they're having a meeting. And Reg is the chair of it. And he's got all the People's Front there with him. And they're going, right, now, why do we hate the Romans? What have the Romans ever bloody done for us?
The aqueducts.
Aqueducts, Reg. Well, there's the wine, Reg. Oh, yeah, can't forget the wine. The wine was amazing. Health and safety, Reg. Well, law and order now is pretty good in the streets there, Reg. Yeah, I'll give you it. Okay, I'll give you irrigation, law and order. Okay, just everything that you could imagine a modern society to be and have. Right, so apart from blah, 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 and blah, and blah, blah, what have the Romans ever done for us? And then there's another one as well. Yeah. So fucking funny. And then there's a bit later on when Brian is with them and the old guy is at the door. He's the guy who played the person we mentioned who was being stoned. He goes to the door and goes, "My back is bent, my eyes are old and broken," and it's the Romans there with John Cleese who are coming to search for these Judean People's Fronts and the groups and pacts that are around. They go in the house in quick,
really obvious places,
obvious, like behind a curtain and under a table with a leg out or something, and they march in really quickly. Like it's double speeded. So,
yeah, and it's basically like a clown car, like I don't know, 15 Roman soldiers or something.
Yeah, and one guy who comes out and says, "I found this spoon, sir."
Yeah,
he goes, "Okay, thank you." And then they have this little set-a-tete, the old guy and the general, lieutenant or commander, and and he walks out and says, "We'll be back for you." And literally 5 minutes later, the old man, "My eyes are broken, back to back." Up the door again. They're all in obvious silence. It's just so funny.
We missed
so
a spot.
Stupid. Yeah. We missed a spot. Yeah, one single spot. Oh, God. And then we start kicking into the kind of the more religious-esque, well, the chasing of Brian when that starts to begin. So we should explain that, I guess. the gourd.
Well, I mean, he
And the
when he
shoe.
joins the revolutionary movement to free Judea, led by Reg, he eventually joins a mission to infiltrate the estate of Pontius Pilate and kidnap his wife. Unfortunately, several other of the revolutionary movements have had the same idea, and so they all meet.
On the same day at the same time.
Yes, and they all meet, and then they get into a fight, and they all kill each other, leaving Brian as the sole survivor. And Brian is then captured by the Romans, and led to Pontius Pilate, which leads to the scene where he talks about his good friend Biggus Diggus.
Yeah.
With a significant lisp on Pontius Pilate.
Because it's one of those scenes again, like the Black Knight.
He has a wife, you know. Do you know what her name is? Incontinentia.
And then
Buttocks incontinentia.
the funny thing is, not only are the guards teetering on laughter every time and trying to hold it in whenever he turns and looks at them, but every time Brian looks up, he goes, "Strike him, Centurion!"
Yeah.
Smack! And Brian's like, "Oh, again." Oh man, it's hilarious. It never fails to break me, that scene. And then that carries on
Anyone
further
else
on. That
feel
joke.
like a little giggle when I mention my friend Biggus Diggus?
Oh, and then later on we'll get to Graham Chapman is another general or whatever, and he comes in and he's got a lisp as well. And between them, that scene near the end.
Oh yeah,
we'll
that is a different role for Graham Chapman. That's right. He plays Biggus
Oh
Diggus.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, we only mentioned one, so that must be the only other role. I can't think of any other he is in that film. I don't think anyway. So yeah, there are some amazing scenes in this film that weave together so wonderfully well, and the balance between the characters in these scenes is sensational.
When Brian tries to flee Pontius Pilate's palace, he is abducted by aliens, who then fight an interstellar battle, and are shut down. Their spaceship is shut down and crash lands in Judea again, like in Jerusalem, or I would assume.
That's the craziest part about the entire film. Not anymore because I've seen it so many times. But when you first watch that film, you don't know what's going on. Like all of a sudden, you're on a spaceship with aliens that look like they're, Jim Henson rejects with eyes that are popping out. Looking at interstellar battle, they get shot down, and then Graham Chapman as Brian just gets up and goes and dusts himself off and carries on running. It's such a weird, surreal moment in the film.
You lucky bastard.
You lucky bastard. That guy hanging up, he's been there for years. Michael Palin.
Oh, crucifixion. What I wouldn't do to be crucified.
That's a running gag throughout the film. Like, everyone wants to be crucified rather than the other thing they're having to do. Crucifixion's a doddle. What? I can't eulogize over this film enough in just how funny it is. I mean, the chase sequence when so he's gone home by this, or he's in his house, isn't he, with his mum, and his mum is just getting finished with a Roman, as it were, and he's out on the balcony, and the loads. Oh no, hold on. The chase is prior. So. You got the sandal and the gourd, these two symbols of Brian.
Well, I mean, when he runs away after the UFO crashes, and he gets to the market where there are all these prophets talking about Judgment Day and whatever, like Doomsday, or like Prosper rising about.
There's Terry Gilliam's one going, "And ye and the down, we shall die," and then there's Michael Palin. And you won't remember that thing that you put there yesterday, about 5 o'clock. In amongst those other small things that you can't find either. It'll be there somewhere, but you might need to leave it. What is this weird.
And so Brian gets up there and starts giving his own sermon, and people sort of flock to him, and other people start showing up and listening to him, and the Romans pass him because he's successfully disguised himself, and then he runs off, and then people start following him because they didn't get the answers to the questions they were asking him, and they want the answers. And then they start following him, and he drops like he tries to hide out in next to like a gourd vent or some kind of vendor who then hawks a gourd off to him, but forces him to haggle for it. And then he runs off, and he drops the sandal, one of his sandals, and he drops the gourd. And then like the people following him pick these items up, and then inject a deeper meaning into these objects that he has discarded.
Well, like religions we've seen, have they almost a split off with follow the gourd, the holy gourd of Brian, follow the shoe, the sandal of Brian, and then Spike Milligan, they've all moved on. Spike Milligan just wanders in after them and kind of goes, and he goes, oh, again, just this tiny little cameo. Oh, this is so funny. You can talk about your favorite bit.
Well, yeah, that's when Brian keeps running, and then he runs into this Hermit, who's basically dug himself into this hole where he's isolated himself and has taken a vow of silence for, I think, 15 years or something. And then Brian falls into the hole, lands on his foot, and he cries out in pain, and then his vow of silence is broken. And he starts he starts celebrating quite loudly, which unfortunately breaks Brian's hiding place, as he's still rather desperate to hide from the crowd that is chasing him. And so they all come to the hole, and they ask Brian to give his sermon again, and they ask for food because he led them here, and they're all starving. And so there are juniper bushes, and it's a miracle because the juniper he led them right to where there would be juniper bushes, so they could sate their hunger. And then they run off to eat from the juniper bushes, which belong to the Hermit, and the naked Hermit. The Hermit is incidentally fully naked, except for a really long beard that goes pretty much all the way down to his feet. And it must have been like he's played by Terry Jones quite brilliantly, and it like I heard stories from behind the scenes of Terry Jones actually directing the film, completely stark naked, but just with the beard, which is a really, really funny image. And and then they move on. Like after they determine, sadly, that the Hermit is a heathen and that he must be beaten rather severely. And then Brian then flees, and returns back home, manages to get back home, which is where he runs into his mother and the Roman, I think.
Yeah, and I think after that is probably the second most iconic scene in the film. I think the ending is the most iconic by a long way, just because of the song and people know it so well. But I think Brian stood at that window with the crowds that followed him, and every time he speaks, they all answer in unison.
Yeah.
And then Terry Jones comes out as the mother and talks to the crowd, and it has to be one of the.
He's the Messiah.
He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy.
Yeah, so funny. And that crowd, the way they answer in unison, like they're school children being told off. Aww, you can see for 5 minutes and not a minute more.
That wasn't 5 minutes.
Oh yes, it was.
Yes, it was. Oh no, it wasn't. Oh, it's like a pantomime. It's so musical, the way that the way they speak and the way they answer back. It's such a lovely scene. And that's definitely one of the most iconic scenes that I think a lot of people know of or have heard of or seen before. And then we start kind of heading towards the end, where Brian ends up captured by the Romans, and we start with even more hilarity to ensue.
Yeah, where he gets they try, like, Pontius Pilate wants to they capture Brian, and Pontius Pilate wants to offer clemency to someone in the dungeon, but of course all the people who will name the person, just throw out names in order to get Pontius Pilate to say them. So like Reginald, and Roger, Watcha, and so forth, that are not actually people in the dungeon, but are just names that he can't pronounce with an R in them because of his lisp.
John Cleese every now and going, we don't have a Roger, sir.
Yeah.
We don't have a Roger?
Yeah. And then, of course, they finally end up with Brian, and Brian is then with Judith calling out his name, and but there is actually a Brian, so the fun stops, and they send out and Brian's already sort of been sent out on the crucifixion train in order to get crucified on the hill, and so they send out the soldiers to offer him clemency, and of course. He's when they arrive at the hill where they've been crucified, and they ask for Brian. Brian's caught up in a discussion with someone else, and so the master troller, who's sort of been trolling people throughout the entire film, then says, "Oh, I'm Brian," and then they take him down off the cross. No, I'm not actually Brian, but
no, I'm joking. Yeah. I'm not Brian.
Yeah, and then no, we can't be bothered. Just let him go, and poor Brian is stuck up there on the cross still.
Then we get the kamikaze group.
Yeah.
And kind of salute his effort, and then and kill themselves and fall down. It's like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And I think his mum comes to see him, Terry Jones. And
Judith comes to see him as well.
Judith comes to see him.
How what much you're doing is what he's done.
In fact, all of them come, don't they?
Because Reg told her how he's become a martyr for their cause.
Yeah, we salute you, Brian.
Yeah.
And then they have a little discussion.
For he's a jolly good fellow.
Good fellow, for he's. And then walk off into the sunset. And of course, the characters that we saw near him when they were at the very start watching Jesus on the Mount are kind of all next to him on the crosses.
Yeah.
So that guy and his wife. It's very uncomfortable up here. The way they kind of make light of such a truly horrifying way to die is absolutely magnificent. And then, of course, we get what is
Eric Idle's Immortal Song. Yeah.
Maybe one of... I want to say my favourite song of all time, because quite frankly, I know it backwards. I could sing it to you now. It's one of those songs that's ingrained in me for loads of different reasons. But the way he sings it, and the way the crowd joins in, and the way everyone's tapping their feet and dancing on the crucifixes is just something to behold. And it never gets boring. I've never seen it and gone, oh, I think I should turn this off.
No,
it's magnificent, and that's what this film is. It's got the tiniest minor thing wrong with it in that black.
John Cleese himself said that he considered Life of Brian to be their magnum opus of Monty Python.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, one thing we could just discuss before we slowly wrap up is the controversy when it came out. Now, when it came out in the UK, local councils were banning it because they considered it blasphemous.
Yeah, and it was banned in Ireland.
Yeah. And then started being banned in other places.
It got banned in Norway.
Religious. Yeah.
Which may sound strange, but Norway is sort of kind of evangelical Christian, old Christian country, especially in the rural areas.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. But yeah, it was high on the list of controversial films for a long time. When it came out, there was a conversation. I can't remember if it was like an archbishop and a high-ranking priest or something like that, alongside Palin and Cleese. And if you haven't seen it, you should certainly watch it. You probably have. But the intelligence of the discussion in defense of their film with regard to what these religious people are trying to tell them is blasphemous and horrifying to the church, and all these things is a joy to behold. Michael Palin in particular is absolutely fantastic in the way he defends Python and what they're trying to say through Life of Brian. It really is amazing.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a difficult one to talk about, but I think it's one that is really easy to talk about quickly because you can get over the major sequences that are so cool. And it's been talked about so much that there's not much more we can probably extrapolate, I don't think.
But I mean, the sets, the actors and the shots themselves, it's just really well directed. By Terry Jones. Like, there isn't a cut that feels out of place.
No.
It just works. Like, it flows really, really well. And yeah, like we mentioned early on in this episode, like the joke construction is just like close to peerless, if not peerless.
I'll give you one final nitpick, and only because I have to find some tiny shred of something which isn't perfect. When they are in the Colosseum, the people from Judea, and Eric Idle says "splitter," he goes "Splitter," doesn't quite get the word right. That's about it. That's how difficult it is to pull apart what is truly outstanding. Even the titles, you know, when it pans up to the mount and it goes, was it Saturday afternoon? About tea time. Yeah. The way the Pythons always, they did it in the Holy Grail as well. And highly recommend if you haven't seen Holy Grail, sublime. But please watch Life of Brian if you haven't seen it. It's an important, really, it's exceptionally funny, but it's a really important film.
It's timeless.
Yeah. The themes it talks about in relation to
are universal,
scripture and religion and the understanding of it and the indoctrination of it. All these different themes are at play all the time. And you, if you don't laugh during Life of Brian, there's a funny bone missing out there in the universe somewhere that you need to find.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. I think that's enough Life of Brian, and I don't hesitate to say to you guys, just go out and watch it. Just go out and watch it. It's available bloody everywhere, and it's in my humble opinion, the single funniest comedy ever put to film.
It's certainly up there.
Okay, now we're going to be changing quite a bit for next week. Silver, you have something very different in mind.
I think we will actually stay with comedies.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Stay in the funny corner, and because I just discovered that an old favorite of mine when I grew up, another one called The Great Race, which is another Blake Edwards film. Was on YouTube, and so I think that'll make a great pick for next week, which is basically it's kind of Blake Edwards' magnum opus. At the time it was made, it became the most expensive comedy ever made. Like massive budget for it. Much of that budget went to constructing these amazing cars, like the Great Leslie's car and Professor Fate's car. Professor Fate played by Jack Lemmon, the Great Leslie played by Tony Curtis in another collaboration of them. The other being Some Like It Hot, which is by some deemed to be the greatest comedy ever made. Like the American Film Institute named it so. Yeah, it's a really sort of wonderful tribute to old school silent movies and Laurel and Hardy and a lot of that type of comedy. A lot of slapstick, like same with Pink Panther that we talked about, but also different types. Yeah, it's a movie that is a little bit uneven. It struggles with its pacing a little bit, I think, in places from what I remember, but I haven't seen it in maybe 10 years or so. So I'm really looking forward to watching it again.
Well, the video you sent me, just to kind of give me a little preview of what it was, looked very much like Phileas Fogg, Around the World in 80 Days, wacky races, Cannonball Run, but
yeah, I mean, wacky races, and like even the character of Dick Dastardly is basically based on Jack Lemmon's Professor Fate. And
that's going to be awesome.
And Mudley is basically based on Peter Falk's hapless assistant Max.
I can't wait. I think that's going to be really, really cool and funny. I love that kind of film. Okay, well, thank you so much for watching. This has been the Last Edit podcast. We are on everything, folks. We are on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Anchor, we're on iTunes. So if you want to just listen to our dulcet tones rather than view our ugly faces, you may do so. Apart from that, talk to us in the comments. Have you seen Monty Python's anything, but particularly Life of Brian? And what do you think of it? Do you hold it up in the same esteem that I do and Silver does? What's your favourite scene? What's your favourite character? What's your favourite moment in the film? Because it's a triumph of comedy, and everyone has something particular they latch onto within that film. And just, yeah, keep with us. We've got loads of stuff coming, way more obscure films. We've got some specials we're setting up, some series we're looking at, loads more content. Right, thank you very much for watching. I've been Citizen Sleeve. This has been
Silver Hawkins.
And we shall catch you very soon.
Take care.